Welcome to the Despicable Maine Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into something pretty fundamental. Why calling America a democracy might actually undermine our republic and, well, chip away at individual liberty.
It's a really interesting angle.
Yeah, and you, our listener, sent in some great material highlighting concerns about this, specifically this idea of majority tyranny and how protections for individual rights, minority rights too, could get eroded.
Right. The idea that just because 51% want something doesn't automatically make it right or constitutional.
Exactly. It's not just about winning a vote. It's like saying a gourmet meal is just food. You miss the whole point, the structure, the recipe.
What's fascinating, I think, is the core principle here. The U.S. system, as designed anyway, isn't supposed to be just about what the majority feels right now. It's meant to protect everyone's fundamental rights, always. And that's the heart of a republic versus a pure democracy. The founders were very aware of this difference.
Totally. And that's our mission today, really. To unpack what they intended. Why did they deliberately set up a constitutional republic? You know, a system with representatives, yes, but operating within constitutional limits designed to protect liberty, even from the majority. We need to get into their worries about, well, what they sometimes called mob rule.
Yeah, not a flattering term.
Not at all. So get ready to understand why this distinction isn't just like wordplay. It really hits at the core of your freedoms.
And the sources you sent really hammer this home. They emphasize that the United States was intentionally set up as a constitutional republic.
Right, not an accident.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And look at the key documents. The Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Federalist Papers. The word democracy isn't used to describe the U.S. system in them.
That absence is pretty telling, isn't it?
It speaks volumes. It suggests they saw a difference, and the difference mattered.
It's like that chef example. Again, carefully making a souffle but calling it a pancake. It shows a misunderstanding of the whole thing. And the founders weren't just being picky about words.
No, they viewed pure democracy with real suspicion, often equating it with mobocracy, unstable, prone to passion over reason.
Like a house of cards in a stiff breeze, not exactly stable governance.
Not what they were aiming for. James Madison, for instance, in Federalist No. 10, that's a key one. He explicitly warned about the turbulence and contention he saw in pure democracies. He worried about the risk of majorities just steamrolling minority rights if there weren't any checks.
Imagine, 51% deciding the other 49% can't express certain opinions. That's the kind of danger he saw, right?
Exactly. No inherent limits. And it wasn't just Madison. Think about Alexander Hamilton.
Okay.
In Federalist Note 48, he defended the Electoral College. Now, that's always controversial.
Oh.
But his argument was it acted as a buffer against the heats and ferments of, sudden popular passions influencing the presidency directly. He wanted some deliberation, some insulation.
A bit of a cooling mechanism.
Sort of. And then you have John Adams. He was even more blunt.
What did he say?
He basically said democracy is no system at all. Pretty harsh.
Wow. Okay. So there's a clear pattern here. Deep skepticism about direct, unchecked majority rule.
Definitely.
So let's unpack that fear, that mob rule idea a bit more. The sources really emphasize this core danger. In a pure democracy, just 51% of the people could, theoretically, vote to take away the rights of the other 49%.
It sounds extreme, maybe, but that's the logical endpoint if majority will is the only law. No fundamental backstops.
Yeah, it's like saying if 51%, like vanilla chocolate ice cream, gets banned for everyone, it ignores fundamental preferences, or in this case, rights.
And the sources give some, unsettling examples of where that could lead.
Like what?
Well, imagine the majority decides wealth isn't fairly distributed. In a pure democracy scenario, they could just vote to redistribute it.
So basically, the majority taking property from a minority simply because they have the votes.
That's the potential risk, yes.
Yeah.
A direct hit on economic liberty, justified only by numbers.
Or what about free speech, something most people value?
Right. But if 51% decide a certain viewpoint is, say, dangerous or unhelpful, maybe under the guise of the public good, they could vote to censor it, silence people they disagree with. It's still censorship, even if popular.
It's like if most people find a book offensive, they just vote to burn it, never mind its message or artistic value.
That's the kind of scenario they worried about. And maybe even more concerning
Go on.
is the idea that the majority could dismantle the very institutions designed to prevent this tyranny.
Like attacking the referees.
Sort of. The sources mention things like packing the Supreme Court to make it compliant, or abolishing the Electoral College, or maybe changing the Senate structure. You know, the thing that gives states equal footing.
Which impacts places like Maine directly.
Exactly. These actions would weaken the checks and balances on raw majority power.
So the founders weren't just being philosophical. They saw real dangers if emotion and sheer numbers could override reason and basic rights. They believed rights weren't granted by the majority, right? They were inherent.
That's the idea. Rights aren't supposed to be negotiable based on opinion polls.
Which brings us to the alternative they chose, the republic as a safeguard.
Precisely. Our system, as the sources stress, isn't meant to be that free-for-all majority rule. It's a constitutional republic, carefully built with layers of protection.
Like the Constitution itself and the Bill of Rights.
Absolutely. Those aren't suggestions. They're fundamental laws designed to limit what everyone, including the government, and even a large majority, can do.
They're like those sentinels against the tyranny of the majority, as the sources put it.
Good phrase. And mechanisms like the rule of law, judicial review, they ensure that, even if 90% of people decided tomorrow they didn't like, say, the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches.
Yeah.
They couldn't just vote it away instantly. There are processes, legal principles protecting those rights.
Okay, so what are some of those other layers?
Well, you've got separation of powers, legislative, executive, judicial branches checking each other. That's huge.
Prevents one branch from getting too powerful.
Right. And federalism dividing power between the federal government and the states. Again, preventing over-concentration of power.
And the Senate structure we mentioned.
Yes. Equal representation for states. That means Maine's voice in the Senate counts just as much as California's, regardless of population differences.
Which, living in Maine suddenly feels pretty important. It's not just some old rule. It protects smaller states' interests.
It was designed to. And the Electoral College, for all the debate, the intent was similar. Prevent a few big population centers from totally dominating presidential elections. Make sure voices across the country matter.
Gives weight to different regions, different concerns.
That was the idea. And don't forget how hard it is to amend the Constitution.
Oh, yeah, the supermajority requirements.
Exactly. That's not just meant to be difficult for the sake of it. It's a deliberate break against rash, emotionally driven changes to the fundamental rules of the game.
Okay, so the structure is clearly Republican, designed with all these checks, but the sources you sent seem really concerned about how we talk about it now, this increasing use of the word democracy.
Yes.
It sounds like just semantics, maybe, but they argue it's, well, more serious than that. Why is the language shift seen as such a problem?
Well, the argument is that constantly calling the U.S. a democracy without qualification kind of normalizes the idea that majority opinion should be the final word on everything.
Ah, I see. It subtly chips away at the idea of limits.
Exactly. It erodes the understanding that there are fundamental rights and constitutional principles that stand above simple majority preference. It sort of fosters this feeling that if 51% want something, they should just get it, regardless of the impact on the 49% or the constitutional framework.
It's like calling that carefully balanced ecosystem a monoculture eventually. You forget why the diversity mattered.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And the sources connect this language shift to real-world pushes for things like
Court packing.
Yeah, or getting rid of the Electoral College, things that would fundamentally change that Republican structure we just talked about, potentially concentrating power based on majority will.
It's like a slow, steady pressure changing the shape of things.
Could be.
Yeah.
In a republic, the idea is your rights, say Second Amendment rights, First Amendment rights are written down, they're legally protected.
Not up for grabs every election cycle.
Ideally, no. But when democracy becomes the mainframe, it subtly implies that maybe those rights are contingent on popular opinion, that they should change if enough people want them to.
And the sources suggest this constant repetition of democracy isn't accidental, that it might even function like propaganda.
Well, they suggest it acts to reshape how people think about their government. It subtly pushes towards more centralized power based on a majority whim, potentially weakening those protections for individual liberty that define a republic.
Like a kind of linguistic misdirection.
That seems to be the concern raised in the material, yes.
Okay, so bringing it all together, what does this mean for you, the listener? Why should you care if someone calls the U.S. a democracy or a republic? Seems a bit academic, maybe.
Well, it really boils down to your individual liberty. How safe are your rights?
Okay.
The sources argue that a republic, the system the founders designed, prioritizes protecting those individual rights through law, making them less vulnerable to, shifting public moods.
Whereas a system focused only on the majority's will
Could leave minority rights exposed. And let's be honest, everyone belongs to some minority group on some issue, so those protections matter to everyone eventually.
Think about your right to speak freely, your right to fair treatment under the law, property rights.
In our republic, those are supposed to be constitutionally guaranteed, at least in principle. In a pure democracy, where only the majority vote counts, they could theoretically be voted away.
So it's not just about history books. It's about understanding the actual system we have or are supposed to have and being alert when the language used to describe it might be, well, misleading.
Right. It encourages you to think critically about the terms being thrown around and what they imply for your own freedom.
The sources you provided definitely lay out a strong case that the founders deliberately chose a republic to protect against risks they saw in pure democracy. Risks like the majority overriding minority rights.
And it's clear this distinction isn't just historical trivia. It has real consequences for how we view our rights and our government structure right now.
Yeah, the ongoing use of democracy to describe the U.S. as these sources see it might be subtly shifting our focus away from liberty protected by law towards just the will of the majority, and that could erode those crucial safeguards.
A crucial point to consider.
Thanks for tuning in to the Despicable Maine Deep Dive podcast. Remember, the United States has been hijacked, so soon living in the United States will be theft of your life. And as always, living in Maine is theft of your life.